In this video, I'm providing a Bordeaux breakdown. If you're new to wine or to wine collecting, this video will definitely be helpful for you as I'll be explaining some basic information about Bordeaux and some things that confused me when I was first starting out. But if you're an experienced wine drinker, this video should also be beneficial for you as I'll be drilling deep as well and also discussing topics like why the wines being made in Bordeaux today are even better and higher quality than wine from epic vintages such as 1982. So what's so special about the Bordeaux region, and why has it been regarded as one of the most prominent and high quality producers of wine for hundreds of years? Well, there's several reasons. Of course, there's tremendous winemaking expertise that's been refined over hundreds of years. But in addition, the conditions are ideal for the production of high quality fruit that, in turn, makes excellent wines. For one, there's diverse soil types, such as gravel soils that are well suited to the production of high-quality Cabernet Sauvignon, and clay soils that are ideal for the production of high-quality Merlot. There's also a moderate maritime climate that's well suited to the production of high-quality fruit. The proximity to the Atlantic Ocean is fortuitous, as that ocean is very cool and provides cooling influences to Bordeaux. But there's also generally enough sun, at least in the stronger vintages, to ensure that the fruit gets completely ripe before the fall rains come in. And there's also typically adequate rainfall. The result is extremely high quality fruit that is well balanced in terms of its tannic structure, its acidity, and its sugar levels. This high quality fruit produces wines that are capable of extreme longevity, at least in the case of some of the top producers that have some of the best locations in Bordeaux. What grapes are used in the production of Bordeaux wines? Bordeaux has probably about 90% red grapes, but they also have some white grapes as well. So they produce both red wines and white wines. Unlike in the United States, you won't see a variety such as Cabernet Sauvignon or Sauvignon Blanc on the label. Regardless of whether you're talking about red wines or white wines, Bordeaux winemakers use a blend of fruit to produce the wines. In the case of red wine, Bordeaux winemakers are able to use up to 6 grapes and include those grapes in the blend in any proportions that they choose. These 6 grapes include Merlot, which is the most widely planted grape in Bordeaux, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, and Carmenere. But of course, Malbec and Carmenere are rarely used in the wines, and if they are used, it's typically just in a very small percentage. Petit Verdot is also typically quite small, and it's generally maybe 5% or as little as 1% of a blend when it is included. If you're talking about white wine, you're generally talking about Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel. With respect to the white wines, they have both dry wines and also sweet wines such as Chateau d'Yquem. With respect to the grapes that can be used to produce Bordeaux wines, I should also mention that there was recently a change to the regulations to allow the inclusion of some additional drought-tolerant grape varieties in the Bordeaux blends. This was because there was some concern, particularly among the producers of more daily drinking type Bordeaux, that some of the grapes that they had been producing are struggling in the warmer temperatures that Bordeaux experiences on a more regular basis these days. And so in the case of red grapes, producers are now able to include grapes such as Touriga Nacional and Marselan, and with white grapes you might see varieties such as Albarino. These grapes were first planted beginning in about 2021, and they can only be 5% of the vineyard plantings, and they can make up no more than 10% of the blend of any of the wines. For this reason, it's unlikely that the inclusion of these additional grapes will have a substantial or material impact on the final wines, and it's most likely going to be more the everyday wines that include these grapes, and not some of the top producers like the first growth Bordeaux. When someone's describing a Bordeaux, they'll inevitably refer to it as either being a left bank or a right bank Bordeaux. So what do these terms mean, and why is it significant? Well, in Bordeaux, the Gironde estuary divides the left bank from the right bank. On the west side of the Gironde estuary, the vineyards that are located on that side of the river are collectively referred to as the left bank. Similarly, to the east or the right side of the estuary, you'll find vineyards that produce right bank wines. wines. Why is this significant? Well, it's actually a shorthand way to give you some insight into the grapes that are included in the blend. For example, left bank wines are typically Cabernet Sauvignon dominant, although there are some exceptions. With respect to right bank wines, you're typically talking about a wine that's Merlot dominant and includes a substantial percentage of Cabernet Franc, although again, there's definitely some exceptions as well. Why is this the case? Well, on Bordeaux's left bank, you'll typically find more gravelly soils that are conducive to the production of high-quality Cabernet Sauvignon, and on Bordeaux's right bank, you'll typically have more clay soils that are better suited to Merlot, although there's also some limestone on the limestone plateau that produces high-quality Cabernet Franc as well. Even on Bordeaux's left bank and right bank, however, there are particular areas that are even stronger and better suited to the production of high-quality wines than other areas. The wines that I discuss on this channel are typically from one of these special areas. On Bordeaux's left bank, for example, you'll have appellations such as Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Margaux, and Grave, which also has a sub-appellation called Pessac-Léognan. And on the right bank, you'll have particularly strong appellations such as Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. Classifications of Bordeaux wines can also be confusing, especially to those who are new to wine collecting. On the left bank, there was an 1855 classification of Bordeaux that's undoubtedly the most significant classification for Bordeaux wines. Back in 1855, in advance of an exposition to be held in Paris, the wines were classified so that the top quality wines from Bordeaux could be highlighted at that exposition. And so about 60 or 61 wineries were all classified into 5 different tiers or growths. These tiers were not based on any tasting evaluations. Rather, they were rated based on their average selling price over an extended period of time. This classification of 1855 has remained largely unchanged to this day. There was one minor clerical change, and Mouton Rothschild was promoted from second growth to first growth back in the early 1970s. Despite the fact that the classification took place way back in 1855, in many instances it remains valid to this day. For example, all of the producers classified as first growths today would retain that status even in a reclassification. But if there were reclassification, you may have some additional producers added to the first growth category. One I'm thinking of in particular would be L'Emilion Haut-Brion. If there's a producer that you think should be elevated to first growth in the event of a reclassification, please let me know in the comments below. Undoubtedly, however, there would be a substantial shakeup at the lower levels, as for example, there's some fifth growth Bordeaux producers like Pontet-Canet and Lynch-Bages that are making much higher quality wines than a typical fifth growth, and which would be rated much higher if there was a reclassification. There's other areas in Bordeaux that also have classifications. Grave, for example, has a classification, but that's just a list, and there's no hierarchy. So the producers there are either classified for red wine or white wine or both. In Pomerol, there's no classification at all. In Saint-Emilion, there is a classification. However, this classification has become less important, especially for collectible wines, as the top 3 producers in Saint-Emilion, namely Angelus, Auxonne, and Cheval Blanc, have recently withdrawn from the classification. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. Of course, one of the things for which my channel is most well known is the identification of wines that offer high quality for the price. And for those of you looking for high QPR Bordeaux wines, you'll definitely want to keep an eye out for the Cru Bourgeois designation or classification as well. This Cru Bourgeois designation is based on an assessment of a producer's production methods, as well as a tasting based on the finished wines. It's a rating that applies to a particular wine and not to a producer generally. Beginning with the 2018 vintage, there's 3 different categories of Cru Bourgeois wines. At the entry level, you'll have Cru Bourgeois. Then one level up from that is Cru Bourgeois Superior. And then at the highest tier, you will have Cru Bourgeois Exceptionnel. This designation will apply to the wine for a period of 5 years. Another potential source of confusion is second wines and second labels. These can oftentimes be confused with growth status as well. For example, Léoville-Lascasse is a second growth Bordeaux producer in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, and so its top wine, Léoville-Lascasse, is a second growth. Confusingly, however, Lascasse also has both a second wine and a second label. Second wines are typically wines that are produced from fruit that a producer determined was not worthy of being included in a top wine. In the case of Lascasse, the second wine is called Petit Lion du Marquis de Lascasse. In contrast, second labels are made from fruit that's never considered for the top wine. In the case of Léoville-Lascasse, for example, Clos du Marquis is always made from wine that's in a particular plot and that always goes into Clos du Marquis. Particularly for those of you who are looking to drink your wines in the near term, second wines are a great choice, both because they cost less than the top wine and because they're made in a style that's designed for earlier consumption than the top wine. Some producers even have third wines and fourth wines as well. In places like Napa Valley, the weather's generally fairly reliable, and while some vintages are better than others, it's somewhat unusual to have a truly awful vintage. In contrast, certainly historically, Bordeaux has had more substantial vintage variation, and so vintage is extremely important. For this reason, wines in Bordeaux actually fluctuate in price. In strong vintages, the wines will be priced much higher than in weaker vintages. One of the reasons why I devote so many videos to Bordeaux is because Bordeaux is producing some of the best wines in the entire world, and the quality of the Bordeaux being produced today is much higher than at any point in Bordeaux's illustrious history. For example, the wines being produced today are of much higher quality than even the wine being produced in epic vintages such as 1982. There are several reasons for this. First, you're getting more consistently warm vintages from year to year, but more importantly, producers are using only a fraction of their fruit for their top wines. In 1982, in contrast, very few producers had second wines, and most producers put the majority of the fruit from each harvest into the top wine. Now, however, producers are making very strict selections of fruit and including maybe only half or perhaps even a quarter or 1/3 of the harvest and taking only the very, very best fruit and using that to make the top wine. And then the rest of the fruit will be declassified and then go into the second or third wine or even sold off after that. In addition, Bordeaux producers are on the cutting edge when it comes to farming and also winemaking with respect to plot-by-plot farming and plot-by-plot vinification. What this means, for example, is that a producer may have 100 hectares of vineyards, but they might divide that vineyard into 100 different plots. For example, one plot may have gravelly soils, and they'll plant Cabernet Sauvignon in that plot and farm that plot a certain way. In contrast, another plot may have clay soils, and so they'll put Merlot in that plot and farm that one a different way, and it will get harvested both separately and earlier, since Merlot ripens earlier than Cabernet Sauvignon. In other words, Bordeaux producers have a tailored plan for every single particular plot in their vineyard, and they're trying to maximize the quality of every single plot rather than just applying one general technique to the overall vineyard as a whole. Similarly, the fruit from each of these separate parcels will be vinified separately and will mature separately as well. This gives the winemaker substantial additional ability to be flexible and to be more precise when it comes to the blending process later on. The result is extremely high-quality wines that have never been better. Another question that comes up quite often is whether or not you have to age Bordeaux for an extended period of time before you enjoy it. As with most questions about wine, the answer is, it depends. This will depend to a large extent on your personal preference and your time horizon. I know some people that just prefer older wines because they value complexity. In contrast, some people may prefer to enjoy their wines younger because they enjoy primary fruit flavors or because they prefer the intensity associated with younger wines, rather than the elegance and finesse associated with some older wines. A person's time horizon will also play a big part in this as well. For example, if you're 70 years old, you're probably not going to want to buy a wine that's going to require 20 years of aging before it reaches its peak. In contrast, if you're 25 or 30 years old, that probably won't be an issue for you. But regardless of whether you prefer older wines or younger wines, there's certainly a strategy that you can implement to ensure that you're able to buy wines from Bordeaux that you enjoy. If you're someone who prefers older wines, you can always buy back vintages in the secondary market. If you prefer younger wines, it's even easier because you can just drink the wines as soon as you like. I will caution you, however, that many of the top wines, such as First Growth Bordeaux, particularly from strong vintages, benefit from at least 10 to 20 years of additional bottle aging before they reach their peak. So if you're someone who plans to consume your wines in the near future, you might want to pick something like a second wine or a third wine from one of these top producers, or you may just want to choose a wine from a producer that doesn't make wines that are quite as age-worthy and structured as some of the top producers. And if you want to enjoy your wines younger, vintage selection is also extremely important. For example, 2009 was known as a vintage that produced some earlier drinking Bordeaux that's extremely enjoyable now, even from top producers. In contrast, 2010 was a vintage that was known for producing generally wines that were much more structured than 2009. As such, it's going to take these wines more bottle age than the 2009 vintage before they show their best. If you'd like to see more of my Bordeaux videos, including videos where I recommend specific Bordeaux wines to purchase, be sure to check out my playlist that's linked above.